Can we just make it a rule at this point? If you pass a gas station with a creepy ass old man in the front of it, get the fuck out. So The Hills Have Eyes tells the story of a family driving through the Nevada desert as they are suddenly preyed upon by cannibalistic mutants. Welcome back everybody, and welcome to my review of The Hills Have Eyes remake from 2006. We're also going to be talking about The Hills Have Eyes 2 from 2007 here in just a couple of days. I've been going along through the Wes Craven filmography. I'm about 4 or 5 movies in, and I decided since The Last House on the Left and The Hills Have Eyes both had remakes that I might as well review those here as well. And since there are now 4 Hills Have Eyes movies, once I get done reviewing these ones in particular, I will also do a standalone Hills Have Eyes ranking. So if you are a Wes Craven fan, or if you're a fan of the Hills Have Eyes franchise in general, please go back, watch those original reviews, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of that content in the future. And now let's talk about the 2006 remake of The Hills Have Eyes. This was actually the first Hills Have Eyes movie that I had ever seen. In 2006, when this came out, I was actually working at a video store. It was my first job ever, and this movie came out right about the same time that I started working there, and it was one of the first things that I took home as one of my employee benefits, a free rental. And me and my dad watched it, and while I liked the movie, while I thought that it was very brutal, while I thought that it was effective, and I thought that it was actually a pretty damn good quality remake, there was something about it that always kept me at arm's length. There was something about it that never really made me want to re-watch it. I've always heard people really praise this remake as one of their favorites, as one of their favorite horror movies, as the best movie that Alexander Aja has done, and I probably mispronounced his name. But it's never really been on my list of favorites, and I've always been curious why. I haven't rewatched this movie in a very long time, so I popped this in a couple of days ago and watched it for the first time in probably 10 years, and yeah, my thoughts have changed a little bit. So starting off with the positives, and this is the thing that not only is what kept me at arm's distance with this movie when I first saw it, but is now the thing that I appreciate about this remake the most, is that this takes the story and the style of the original Wes Craven film in a very modern direction, in a very amped up direction, in a much more gore-filled direction, but it holds on to all of that gritty exploitation, very disturbing side of this story, and it really maintains that feeling throughout the film. And I think that's what always kind of kept me at arm's length. Movies like The Last House on the Left and The Hills Have Eyes, the original ones, were certainly made to be shocking. They were made to make a statement at the time. They were made to push the envelope of what could be done in the 70s. And this movie really does hold on to that. There still maintains the same core storyline about this family driving through the desert, and then they get picked off, I would say one by one, but really in one scene, half the family is taken out within about 2 minutes of each other. And that really has a sense of brutality to it and a sense of sick to it that can really churn your stomach, especially with the way that they kind of advance the sexual assault side of things. Again, you don't get to see a whole lot as far as the actual act in this one, which I'm thankful for. I don't need to see too much of that. But they also add an extra detail with this whole breastfeeding scene. And it really just makes the whole thing that much more icky, that much more disturbing, that much more sick. And it's something about holding on to that style of the original film that really isn't explored too much in modern horror, especially what was modern in 2006, which was all about torture porn and gore and making things look really nice and shiny as far as remakes go. Let's just make it look better than it did, but keep the same storyline. This one really does hold on to what the original Hills Have Eyes was known for and what it was made for. I also think that this version does a little bit better job with that whole thematic element about taking normal people and pushing them to be barbaric. That was kind of the approach of the first film, as well as the original Last House on the Left, which is taking these civilized, normal people, putting them in this horrific situation where they are against as far evil as you can get, and what is going to drive them to become like those people. The original film, I always felt, was a little bit shaky with that, because if somebody is, assaulting and killing and eating your family members, I don't think it really speaks anything on you as a person about you rising to the occasion and enacting some violence on those people, but maybe that's just me. This film actually takes a little bit more time at kind of exploring that, with setting up this whole, not really a confrontation, but a divide between Ted Levine's character and Aaron Stanford's character, where Ted Levine's kind of the typical American man. He's a veteran, he's a cop, and he's burly, and he wants to drive across and not look at directions, and silence woman, I know where I'm going. He's that type of guy. And then Aaron Stanford is very much a character that is a little bit more business type. He's somebody that wouldn't necessarily get into a fight in a bar. And there's this little personality clash that him and his father-in-law have throughout the movie. And that really does set up the journey that Aaron Stanford's character is going to have to go on. And it makes that thematic journey that he goes on from this civilized, very timid person to somebody that has to literally murder a ton of these mutants and save his baby and kind of extinguish this horrific situation. And by the end of it, it makes that journey more satisfying, and it makes it a little bit more clear about what the movie is trying to tell you. I mean, in the original, that character, I always called him Porn Stash, really just has to kill Mars because he's left with no choice. He's got to save his kid. Mars is going to stop at nothing, and so he just sits there and bashes his head in, and maybe it was with a knife, I can't remember, but he just stabs the shit out of this guy, and then the movie just freezes on his face as he realizes what he has done, and that's the end of the film. Well, here, he not only saves his baby, but he takes out every single mutant he comes along inside this little nuclear testing town. And I just think that hammers home the message a lot more. I think it's more satisfying of a third act as well. You get to kind of enjoy the violence that's done upon these mutants a little bit more, where the first film just kind of leaves you with that pit in the bottom of your gut. Where this one, although you have that throughout the entire middle act of the film, you get a little bit more of a satisfying third act, a little bit more of an upswing on your emotions by the end, just watching every single one of these mutants get theirs. I really like the casting with this film as well. Of course, you got Ted Levine, absolute legend, Buffalo Bill himself. He's great here, although he's got a smaller role. Aaron Stanford is somebody that I have always liked ever since Nikita. I mean, he was great in the X-Men movies too, but Nikita was especially where I just grew to love this guy. And I didn't get a chance to finish the show, but he was great in 12 Monkeys for a little bit that I saw. But he's really good here in this role because even though the movie and Ted Levine's character is kind of pushing you towards this opinion that he's kind of a pussy, he doesn't really feel that way. He just feels like somebody that has a different ideology, a different look at life. And so he doesn't really quite feel as helpless of a character, as weak of a character as Porn Stash did in the original film. And I think part of that is because of Aaron Stanford's performance. He just has a little bit of attitude that he can bring to it. And you even get other greats like Catherine Keener, like these actresses that we've seen over and over again. For the life of me, I can't remember her name. Vanessa Shaw, I believe, the chick from Hocus Pocus. That's what I always think of her of. It's just a cool little well-rounded cast. And even though we don't necessarily get performances per se, as far as actual characters out of the mutants, I think that all of them are done very well for their screen presence as well. And a lot of them you will have recognizable actors as well that you can kind of see underneath the makeup. Oh, and being an Alexander Aja movie, of course, we're gonna get some carnage candy. Now, this is a funny one to talk about as far as the gore, because a lot of the gore in this movie is enacted on our heroes, our protagonists, and it's very hard to watch. I mean, when you watch a new mom that just had the whole breastfeeding situation just get her head blown off, that's not satisfying gore, that's effective gore. But like I said earlier, you have this whole third act to where Aaron Stanford's character, as well as the brother and sister, they get a little bit themselves as well, are going in and taking out these mutants through various violent ways, and that's where you really get that satisfying carnage candy. You get to see pickaxes through people's eyes and American flags through throats, and there's a whole pit of body parts that Aaron Stanford wakes up in. I mean, this is a really, really heavy, gore-filled version of The Hills Have Eyes, and I think it's all the better for it. And finally, I think this movie is directed and shot very well. It's hard to really make the desert look beautiful. Of course, it has its own appeal to it, but it can become very visually bland after a while. Just open space and sand and hills. That's about all you get. Well, Aja does a great job at breaking up the way that he shoots certain scenes and really ramps up the tension. This does follow the template of the original film very well, but the way that it's shot is so different that it makes it feel very unique. Even though beat by beat we could essentially say the movie is exactly the same as far as where we start, what we go through, and where we end up at the end, it feels like a very different journey just because of the way that he frames certain things, the way that he paces certain things out, from where Big Bob goes and finds the gas station attendant, and you hear that guy in the distance, "Daddy," and all of that, and he's kind of, it's like a wide shot from back, and you can't see anything, but you feel like you're surrounded along with Ted Levine's character. The way that they have that little crater area with all of the dumped cars from all of the victims is a really cool added detail that we didn't get to see in the original. Even down to the third act where you get into this little nuclear town. I mean, the original was a cave with a bunch of Texas Chainsaw leftover memorabilia hanging around it, which was effective for that film, but this being a whole town that these mutants have kind of made their own, and there's these decrepit houses and all the decor in these houses, and you've even got the little section with these two little kids and baby cribs. It fleshes out their world just within about 5 or 10 minutes with no dialogue whatsoever, and it's just done in a really creative way. That's something that I enjoy about this remake, that I enjoy about some of the best remakes, is when you can take something that's already a proven classic, a proven property, a proven idea, and you can follow along with the heart of that, with what made that so great, but take it in your own direction. And this film really does that. It sticks close enough to the original to where fans won't feel alienated, and it won't feel like it's so foreign to the original Hills Have Eyes, but it goes in such a unique direction with the mutants, with this town, with how violent that it gets, and with how tension-filled a lot of this gets before the big explosive middle act where half the family dies, that it really does stand on its own. Honestly, my only negative with this film, and it is something that I think is a bit of a detriment to the rewatch value and to how iconic this film could have been, was the creative choice to take the villains away from being very much human, barbaric but human, into these mutants. The original film had this storyline about the gas station attendant, how he had this kid that was just not right from birth, was not right, and had these violent tendencies and was just barbaric. And then he banished that kid to the desert, and that kid survived and created his own little clan inside of these caves in these hills, and they became cannibals just to survive out in the hills. They were ostracized from society. This one takes the approach of nuclear fallout, that these people were driven out of their homes for the army to be able to do nuclear testing. They refused to leave, and they became mutated because of all the radiation and everything, and now they essentially have the same survival path as the original cannibals, to where we have to sit here because we are now ostracized from society and we're all fucked up and we have to survive off of eating people. But the problem is, while they look cool, while they look creepy, they don't really feel like characters. You remember Papa Jupiter, you remember Mars, you remember Pluto from the original film. Here, you don't really remember any of them. I mean, you have Pluto, who barely speaks. You have Mars is essentially turned into this character named Lizard, who has the most personality of the film, but he doesn't feel as memorable because essentially he just rehashes the same lines from Mars in the first film, but it's just not quite as unique, it's not quite as memorable. And then even Papa Jupiter, total afterthought in this movie. I mean, that was the patriarch, that was the main villain in the first film, and here he shows up for literally like one scene. He's technically the guy that kills Big Bob, but you see him just in the mirror for a second. He doesn't really show up to the movie until the last 10 minutes, and then he's gone. And even the characters, the fodder characters that we get that are just there for Aaron Stanford to kill in the third act, of course there's nothing really memorable about them. So they work well for the movie. They work fine for the different direction they're going as far as this nuclear fallout versus the father-son dynamic of the first film, but there's nothing overly memorable about these villains. You know, the villains in Wrong Turn, for as garbage as those movies are, are more iconic than the mutants in this film. So overall, guys, I really enjoyed this when I watched it. I still wouldn't call it one of my favorites of all time, but I would certainly add this to the conversation of better remakes, better horror remakes of all time. And now when I see people praise this, I'll be able to understand more and actually add to that conversation, because watching it after watching the first one for the first time, I can see why this was a really good modern retelling of that original film and held on to a lot of what made that film very memorable and iconic for the time. So if you like the original Hills Have Eyes, or even if you've never seen a Hills Have Eyes movie before, this is still a very good, effective horror remake. And it's one of the few that's actually worth being on your shelf. So check this thing out and go out and buy it. So what do you guys think of the Hills Have Eyes remake? Do you prefer this or the original? What about this movie stands out to you as what makes it so good as a horror remake? Or if you're somebody that's not a fan of it, what did this movie miss the mark on? Let me know your thoughts down below, and be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the rest of the Wes Craven review series, as well as one more review in the Hills Have Eyes franchise. Thank you guys for watching. Please like and share this video, and as always, remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean that you have to be.